Few figures in the annals of English history loom as large as Henry VIII. Ruthless and charismatic, he reigned over a time of turmoil and transformation, marked by war, religious upheaval, and political intrigue. But what if one small detail had been different? What if Prince Henry, the much-anticipated son of Henry VIII and his beloved wife Catherine of Aragon, had lived beyond 7 weeks of age? This single life, cut short, altered the course of English history in ways both subtle and profound. Join us as we travel back in time to explore the possibilities. This is Turning Point. In the turbulent political landscape of 16th-century England, securing the Tudor dynasty was of critical importance. Henry VII had fought to secure the throne for himself and his heirs, but the legitimacy of his claim remained in question. When Henry VIII came to the throne in 1509, producing an heir of his own was not just a matter of passing on the family name. It was a matter of survival. As only the second Tudor monarch, Henry's legitimacy was still being challenged by some noble houses that clung to the old Plantagenet dynasty. The Wars of the Roses were still fresh in the minds of many, and the very real possibility of a disputed succession was a nightmare scenario Henry was desperate to avoid. The lack of an heir could trigger civil wars, incite rebellions, and leave the country vulnerable to foreign invasions. Without a legitimate male heir, the entire Tudor legacy could be undone by one untimely death or one unfortunate accident. The stakes were high, and the pressure was immense. There was little reason to suspect that Henry's marriage to 23-year-old Catherine of Aragon would be unsuccessful in producing an heir. His own parents had produced 7 children, and 4 had survived into adulthood. However, difficulties became apparent almost immediately. Catherine gave birth for the first time in 1510, less than a year after her marriage, to a stillborn daughter. In 1511 she gave birth again, this time to a son. He was christened Henry after his father, styled the Duke of Cornwall, and it was expected that in time he would ascend the throne as King Henry IX. Sadly for those hopes, the infant prince died suddenly, just 52 days after his birth, crushing his young parents and leaving Henry, once again, without an heir. It was the young Prince Henry's death, along with his parents' subsequent failure to produce between them a living son, which led to the events that make Henry VIII so infamous even today. But what would have happened if the newborn Henry had not died, but had instead survived into adulthood, long enough to become king? The implications of such a scenario are profound, and would have altered the course of history in multiple major ways, as well as in more subtle ones that we can only begin to imagine. While we cannot know with certainty what might have been, we can speculate, using our knowledge of the past to paint a picture of what such a future may have held. Let's travel through the corridors of time and explore the tantalizing scenario of Prince Henry Tudor's survival and ascension to the throne. Given the tumultuous end to their marriage, it is often forgotten that Henry and Catherine's relationship began happy and devoted. Catherine was widely considered to be a beauty, with red gold hair and fair skin, and the teenage King Henry VIII told his counselors that he loved her and longed to wed her. After their marriage, the couple spent a great deal of time in each other's company, riding and hunting together. They shared a love for finery and display, and their marriage, despite its political origins, was considered a love match. Henry even trusted her so much that when he went off to war, he left Catherine to govern the country, which she did well, successfully repelling an invasion by the Scottish in 1513. If his beautiful, intelligent, devoted wife had also given him a healthy son, it is unlikely that Henry VIII would have considered ending their marriage. By 1516, when their daughter Mary was born, the young Duke of Cornwall would have been 5 years old. Although Catherine would never have another living child, she and Henry would doubtless have been comforted by their 2 surviving children, one of them the all-important son, an heir. More importantly for the larger world, it is very likely that had Prince Henry survived, Henry VIII never would have broken with the Catholic Church. In 1517, A German monk by the name of Martin Luther challenged the Church's authority with his 95 Theses, which condemned the sale of indulgences and sparked a religious upheaval that would come to be known as the Protestant Reformation. Luther's ideas spread like wildfire, igniting a wave of religious reform movements that challenged the very foundations of the Church. Henry VIII, a devout Catholic, responded in 1521 with a treatise, The Defense of the Seven Sacraments. In it, Henry fiercely defended the Church's teachings and condemned Luther's theology. His opposition to Martin Luther's ideas so impressed Pope Leo X that it earned Henry the coveted title of Fidei Defensor, or Defender of the Faith. From that day forward, Henry proudly used this title in his official signature. Henry's zeal for Catholicism was not merely a matter of personal belief. It was also a clever political strategy. By taking a firm stance against Lutheranism, he was able to form alliances with other Catholic powers, including Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. The latter was particularly significant, as the new Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, was Catherine of Aragon's nephew. Had Henry remained on good terms with his wife, he could have utilized this familial connection to strengthen his ties with the powerful Holy Roman Emperor. Without the need to set aside his aging wife, Catherine, for a younger woman who could bear a son, it seems very unlikely that Henry would have broken with the Catholic Church. England could have remained a Catholic country. There would have been no Church of England, and the English Reformation would have looked very different. Among other considerations, there would have been no need for the dissolution of the monasteries, and Catholicism would have remained a respected and prominent religion in England. Catholics would not have been persecuted. On the other hand, it is likely that English Protestants would have suffered instead. As the winds of change swept across Europe during the Reformation, nearby Spain stood firm in its devotion to the Catholic Church. The Spanish monarchy and clergy were determined to prevent the spread of Protestantism within their borders and beyond, and ensured it with brutal force. The Spanish Inquisition was established to root out suspected heretics, and Inquisition tribunals were set up throughout the country. Protestants were seen as a grave threat to the existing religious and political order, and were subject to harsh persecution, including imprisonment, torture, and execution. The Spanish government's attitude towards Protestantism was one of complete intolerance and repression, and many Protestants were forced to flee Spain to escape persecution, while others practiced their faith in secret. It is possible that England, under the reign of a staunchly Catholic Henry, might have followed suit. By the 1530s, instead of passing acts through Parliament to assume religious supremacy in England, Henry VIII might have been busying himself with arranging a suitable marriage alliance for his son. With Catholicism still the major religion in England, Henry would have turned to other Catholic countries, such as Portugal, Italy, Spain, or even France, to strengthen alliances. One suitable candidate for Prince Henry's hand, Catherine de' Medici. Born in 1519 in Florence, she was a member of the illustrious Medici family, which had long held power in Italy. The only child of Lorenzo de' Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de la Tour d'Auvergne, Countess of Boulogne. She was also the niece of the current Pope, Clement VII. Although not known for her beauty, her family's fabulous wealth and political power made her a highly sought-after marriage prospect. In 1533, at the age of 14, she was married to the future King of France, Henry II. But what if, instead, she had married the future Henry IX? The dissolution of the monasteries that took place during the English Reformation was a major financial windfall for Henry VIII and his government, providing a significant infusion of cash that allowed him to carry out his ambitious military and political plans. Prior to the dissolution, the monasteries held vast amounts of wealth and land, which had accumulated over centuries of donations and bequests from pious individuals seeking to ensure their salvation. By seizing these assets, Henry was able to replenish his depleted treasury and fund his military campaigns, which included wars with France and Scotland. Without it, it is possible that Henry would have run out of money, as he had already squandered much of the royal treasury on lavish spending and military endeavors. An alliance with the rich and powerful Medici family could have remedied these woes. In addition to an inheritance from her mother, Catherine was given a dowry collected by the Pope himself. A staggering 100,000 gold coins were settled on her, with half to be paid upon arrival and the rest disbursed in installments. But the Pope's dealings did not stop there. He also provided Catherine with magnificent furnishings, art, and jewels, including enormous diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and pearls. The clothing sent with her was of the finest fabrics too, with large quantities of gold, silver, and silk sent to Florence for artisans to sew and embroider into exquisite dresses, undergarments, and crimson bedsheets. The extravagance was so great that a tax had to be imposed to help cover the costs. If Catherine de' Medici's wedding had been to Prince Henry of England, instead of Prince Henry of France, all of that wealth would have gone with her. In 1533, Catherine was 14. Prince Henry would have been 22. But let's not forget about Mary. The daughter of King Henry VIII, she was also a highly sought-after bride, due to her royal status and potential claim to the English throne. Over the course of her life, she was engaged to multiple suitors, each with the potential to form a powerful alliance with England. If Henry, her older brother, had still been alive, she might have been a slightly less attractive match. But let's begin with what actually happened. In 1518, at the age of 2, Mary was pledged to the newborn Francis, Dauphin of France, the son of King Francis I. This engagement was terminated after only 3 years. At age 6, she was then betrothed to her first cousin, Charles V, her mother's nephew and the Holy Roman Emperor. Charles, at 22, was 16 years older than the young Mary, which may have been a factor in Henry VIII and Charles V mutually dissolving the agreement a few years later. Next, negotiations began to have Mary wed Francis I, the powerful King of France. Francis was 22 years her senior, and in the end, a marriage treaty was signed stating that Mary would wed either Francis I or his second son, Henry, Duke of Orleans. The engagement was arranged as a way to solidify alliances between the two countries. However, the engagement was ultimately broken off. In 1528, discussions began to arrange a marriage with another of her cousins, James V of Scotland. It was around this time that Henry began his attempts to set Catherine of Aragon aside in favor of a new wife. Mary was delegitimized and moved to the sidelines, making a match with her much less advantageous than before. However, if his son still lived, it is likely that Henry VIII would have continued trying to make a politically valuable marriage for his daughter. Only 4 years her elder, James V was a much more likely match for Mary than some of her previous engagements, but he was bound by treaty to marry one of Francis I's daughters. Instead, it is much more likely that Mary would have married Henry II, in place of Catherine de' Medici. In 1533, Henry II was 14 years old, and Mary was 17. Henry was only a second son, and not expected to be king. 3 years following the marriage, his elder brother Francis would die suddenly, making him the heir to the throne. And later, Mary would have become Queen of France. But with young Henry and Mary both safely installed in political marriages, and Henry VIII's relationship with his wife, Catherine of Aragon, intact, what would have become of the infamous Anne Boleyn? After all, just because Henry VIII would not likely be seeking a divorce from Catherine, that doesn't mean that he wouldn't have any mistresses. Henry's first confirmed affair began no later than 1518, during Catherine's final pregnancy, with a woman named Elizabeth Blount. Elizabeth Blount, called Bessie, was known for her beauty and wit. She bore the king an illegitimate son in 1519, and named him Henry Fitzroy, a surname meaning son of the king. Henry Fitzroy was the only one of King Henry VIII's illegitimate children that he publicly acknowledged. Despite his illegitimacy, Henry VIII held this son in high regard, granting him the title of Duke of Richmond and Somerset, as well as numerous other honors and appointments. Fitzroy was educated at the best schools and received a royal upbringing, even living at times in the royal palaces. As he grew older, his father considered him a possible successor to the throne, ahead of his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth. Ultimately Fitzroy became ill, and he died in 1536, at the age of 17. Doubtless, the elevation and public favor of a royal bastard would never have gone so far if Henry had a living, legitimate son. Henry VIII saw his lack of a son as a personal failure and an affront to his masculinity. He desperately wanted to prove his virility, and the existence of Henry Fitzroy seemed to him to be proof that Catherine was the problem, not him. However, if his son Henry, Duke of Cornwall, had survived, Henry VIII would have had no need to prove that he was able to father a son. It is possible that with a closer relationship with Catherine, he would not have begun the string of affairs that ended in his relationship with Anne Boleyn, but even if he did, his mistresses would not have held as much power over him. In all likelihood, Henry Fitzroy would have lived and died in obscurity, overshadowed by Henry's legitimate heir. After Bessie Blount, Henry VIII's next confirmed mistress was Mary Boleyn. Mary Boleyn's affair with Henry VIII occurred several years before Anne came to court, but its impact on her cannot be overlooked. Mary was Anne's older sister and a married woman. Although the specific dates of her involvement with Henry VIII are not known, it was widely rumored that one or both of her children had been fathered by the king. When her husband died in 1528, Henry had already tired of her, and Mary was left alone and in debt. Anne arrived as a lady-in-waiting to Queen Catherine of Aragon, but it was not long before she caught the eye of King Henry VIII. Anne Boleyn was not like any other woman at court. She was beautiful, but it was her intelligence, wit, and charm that set her apart. She was well-read, spoke several languages, and was a skilled conversationalist. She quickly became the talk of the court, with many people drawn to her magnetic personality. But Anne was not content to be just another lady-in-waiting. She had ambitions, and she knew how to get what she wanted. She refused to become Henry's mistress like her sister Mary, and instead, insisted she would not sleep with Henry unless they were married. This only served to make Henry more obsessed with her, and eventually he broke with the Catholic Church, annulled his decades-long marriage, and risked everything to have her. However, this move meant making his children with Catherine illegitimate, not something he would have been willing to do to his son Henry. It is likely that stubborn, intelligent Anne Boleyn would have seen that convincing the king to marry her was simply not possible, and have secured a marriage elsewhere. Without her relationship with Henry, she may have married a member of the gentry or nobility, and lived a much less dramatic life. However, given her ambition and desire for power, it is possible that she might have found a way to rise to prominence on her own, becoming a powerful figure in her own right. Whatever she might have done, without her marriage to Henry VIII, it is extremely unlikely that she would have been beheaded in 1536. While Catherine would likely have avoided divorce had her son Henry lived, she could not avoid an early death. By 1535, her health was failing, and she died at the beginning of 1536 at the age of 50, of what is now believed to be cancer. As Henry's wife, she would have received a queen's funeral, and been buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle. Among the mourners would have been 44-year-old Henry VIII, and their son Henry, 25. Mary, aged 20, may not have been able to travel from France for the funeral. With Catherine dead, Henry would have been free to remarry. While it is possible that he would have chosen to remain unmarried, since he had no need to produce an heir and his son Henry might even have children of his own after 3 years of marriage, it seems likely that Henry VIII would have chosen to take a new, young wife. Historically, Henry VIII's marriage to Jane Seymour took place 5 months after Catherine of Aragon's death. Sweet and gentle, Jane had been one of Queen Catherine's maids of honor. It is possible that Henry would still have chosen to marry her, making her in this chain of events, his second wife. If so, she might still have given birth to a son, Edward, in 1537, and died 12 days thereafter. She would likely still have received a queen's funeral, and been buried near Catherine. By 1539, efforts were well underway to find Henry VIII yet another wife. This time, a political alliance. His advisers urged him to ally with another Protestant power, resulting in his brief, unsuccessful marriage to Anne of Cleves. If England had remained a Catholic country, however, it is likely that Henry's third marriage would be to a Catholic. One possible candidate, Maria of Portugal. Duchess of Viseur. A renowned beauty, with fair skin and clear blue eyes, she would have appealed to Henry's taste. She was also well-educated and intelligent, something Henry was known to value. Personal considerations aside, Maria would have been a valuable political match. She was the daughter of Manuel I of Portugal and the niece of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, and would become at one point the richest woman in Portugal. A marriage with her would have brought Henry both political power and wealth. The perfect package. If Henry VIII had married Maria of Portugal in 1540, he would have been 49 years old, and she would have been 19. Assuming Henry found Maria sufficiently attractive, chances are good that their marriage would have continued for a long time, possibly even for the rest of Henry VIII's life. During this time, as his health declined, he did not father any more children, meaning that Maria would likely have avoided the death following childbirth that claimed the life of Jane Seymour. Scholarly and intelligent, she would probably not have fallen victim to the indiscretions that triggered the downfall of Catherine Howard. Instead, her education and love of the arts would have made her a good companion for the aging Henry VIII. Henry VIII died in 1547, at the age of 55. Instead of being notorious for his break from the Catholic Church, the dissolution of the monasteries, and the relentless pursuit of a son that led him to burn through 6 wives, he would be remembered as the second king in the Tudor dynasty, who lived and died, without much in the way of infamy. Henry's widow, Maria, would have been only 26 years old, and might perhaps have returned home to Portugal, or remarried. His son Henry, aged 36, would have taken the throne and ruled England as King Henry IX, avoiding the regency period that followed the coronation of his younger half-brother, Edward, who was only 9 at the time of his father's death. Assuming Henry IX had sons of his own, Edward would never have been king. His sister Mary, Queen of France, would never have ruled England either, and Queen Elizabeth I likely never would have existed. As Henry IX ascended to the throne of a predominantly Catholic England, the course of history would have undoubtedly been altered in countless unforeseeable ways. The religious landscape of the country would likely have remained Catholic, and the political alliances and conflicts of the time would have been vastly different. The Protestant Reformation as we know it may never have occurred. It is impossible to fully comprehend the magnitude of the changes that would have resulted if one small boy, the son of a king, had not died in 1511. What we do know for certain is that history would have taken a vastly different path, with different triumphs and tragedies, challenges and opportunities, shaping the course of events for centuries to come. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel so that you won't miss a thing. There's more fascinating content coming your way all the time. Thank you.